The young and the restless spoilers. Victor Newman had always been a man of control, calculated, impenetrable, always 3 moves ahead. For decades, his ability to manipulate, maneuver, and outwit had not only built the Newman empire but had also ensured that his family, whether willingly or grudgingly, remained orbiting around him like satellites around a burning star. But now, that gravitational pull had begun to falter. His recent actions had become erratic, aggressive, even paranoid. And one by one, those closest to him began to whisper the unthinkable. Victor Newman, the patriarch of the most powerful family in Genoa City, was losing control. It had started with Michael Baldwin's abrupt departure, a man Victor once called his most trusted legal tactician. Michael's exit was less about any singular betrayal and more about the slow realization that Victor had become unrecognizable. He had crossed boundaries even Michael couldn't justify, and when Victor lashed out rather than reflect, Michael simply walked away. That move, rather than inspire introspection, seemed to accelerate Victor's spiral. Without his longtime confidant to temper his impulses, Victor turned even more inward, more reactive, more volatile. Then came the attacks. Jack Abbott had been the first target. For decades, their rivalry had simmered just beneath the surface of every business deal and family gathering. But this time, Victor's fury wasn't about business, it was personal. He accused Jack of manipulating Clare Grace Newman, claiming that Jack was using her to infiltrate the Newman family and weaken its foundation. When Jack laughed off the accusation and tried to appeal to Victor's sense of reason, Victor snapped. He confronted Jack in public, raising his voice in a way that stunned even longtime adversaries. He threatened to expose secrets, to destroy Sabotage with smear campaigns and financial warfare. And then, not 24 hours later, he turned on Kyle. Victor had once admired Kyle Abbott, even trusted him to work alongside Newman Media in tenuous alliances. But that trust had vanished. Now, Victor saw Kyle not as an ally but as a traitor. Someone who had dared to love his granddaughter, Clare, and perhaps more threateningly, someone who had earned her loyalty. Victor stormed into a board meeting Kyle attended, issued a veiled warning in front of stunned executives, and declared him unfit to be anywhere near the Newman bloodline. The fallout was immediate. Clare was humiliated. Kyle was enraged. And the Newman name, which had always been held aloft with power and fear, suddenly felt heavy with chaos. But the worst was yet to come. Billy Abbott, always a thorn in Victor's side, became the next obsession. Victor claimed Billy was conspiring with external investors to undermine Newman Enterprises. There was no proof, only suspicions. But Victor began harassing board members, pulling audit reports at all hours, demanding loyalty oaths from employees. He even authorized surveillance on Billy's movements without legal sanction, using contacts in law enforcement and private security. When Victoria questioned the legality of it, he shut her down cold. If you're not with me, you're with him. And then there was Clare. Victor's obsession with controlling her relationship with Kyle bordered on the pathological. He couldn't bear the idea of her building a future with anyone he didn't personally approve of, especially someone with the Abbott name. So he turned to Audra Charles. Sharp, ambitious, and deeply loyal to power, Audra had always known how to navigate Victor's darker demands. She accepted the task with unnerving ease, dismantle Clare and Kyle. Tear them apart from the inside, but do it quietly. Plant seeds of doubt. Use Clare's insecurities, Kyle's guilt, and the lingering mistrust between their families. Audra went to work like a scalpel, smiling through every maneuver. Clare, perceptive and wounded, noticed the shift almost immediately. Kyle was pulling away, not in anger but in confusion, unsure whether his loyalty to Clare was hurting his family, unsure why executives at Newman Media had suddenly begun whispering about nepotism and scandal. Audra would casually suggest that perhaps Clare was being groomed to replace Kyle in upcoming projects, or that her growing proximity to Newman assets might not sit well with Sabotage. Clare tried to confront Victor, but he offered only cryptic warnings about protection and legacy. she left the conversation more unsettled than when she began. By the end of the week, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Nikki Newman, ever the emotional compass of the family, watched her husband with growing dread. She had seen Victor battle enemies, take on corporations, survive betrayals, and rise stronger. But this was different. His vengeance now had no shape, no clarity. It was spilling into every corner of their lives, poisoning every relationship. Victoria came to her late one evening, eyes red from exhaustion. "He's not just angry anymore, Mom," she whispered. "He's not him. He's tearing everything down and calling it protection." Even Nick, long estranged from the power plays of the Newman boardroom, voiced concern. "Dad's not seeing straight. He's got everyone in his sights, even you, Vic. This isn't strategy. This is fear. This is desperation." Abby, Summer, even Adam, each from their own angle, each with their own scars, began to speak privately, wondering if it was time. Time to intervene. Time to stop him. But how do you stop Victor Newman? Together, they met behind closed doors at the Newman ranch, the irony thick, plotting against the man who had taught them all how to plot. They didn't want to strip him of power. They just wanted him to stop. They wanted him to listen. But when Claire showed up, shaking and furious, holding a printed memo signed by Audra outlining the dismantling of her position and professional reputation, it became clear that Victor had gone too far. He wasn't just attacking enemies now. He was turning against his own. Adam was the first to say it out loud, "He's not going to stop. Not unless we make him." The room fell silent. Nikki sat down, the air gone from her lungs. Her hands trembled as she held the memo Claire had handed over. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. "Do we take his company? His seat on the board? Do we force him out?" Victoria looked at her mother, then around the room. "We do what he taught us. We act as one. We protect the family, even from him." They decided to confront Victor not with anger, but with unity. They would show him that his power no longer terrified them, that love and legacy could not be wielded as weapons. Nikki would be the voice of calm. Victoria would be the voice of reason. Adam, Nick, and Abby would provide backup if he lashed out. And Claire would speak not as a granddaughter desperate for approval, but as a woman who would no longer be used. They approached him the following day in his office, not as children or employees, but as a family. Victor, seated behind his mahogany desk, looked up with narrowed eyes as they entered. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Nikki stepped forward first. "Victor, it's time to talk. As a family." And in that moment, the future of the Newman legacy hung in the balance, not in the value of its stocks or the size of its boardroom, but in whether its patriarch could be made to see that the empire he built was crumbling not from external enemies, but from the fear, control, and fury consuming him from within. Victor Newman had always been a force of nature, but now he was becoming a storm with no eye, no calm center to anchor him. In the quiet halls of the Newman Ranch and the glass towers of Newman Enterprises, the whispers were growing louder. Victor was unraveling. His behavior had taken a darker turn in recent weeks, not merely strategic or aggressive as it had once been, but driven by something more corrosive: vengeance. There was no more chessboard, no long-game calculation. Now there were only targets and retaliation. And worst of all, there was no one left who could stop him. Nikki Newman sat in her private parlor, the crystal glass in her hand forgotten, as she stared at the fireplace with a heaviness in her chest that no celebration or title could ease. She had long been her husband's compass, his equal, his sanctuary. But lately, she felt like a ghost in her own marriage, watching as Victor drifted further into a place she could no longer reach. When Michael Baldwin had still been around, wise, calm, ever the voice of reason, he had been able to pull Victor back from the brink more times than she could count. Michael didn't just work for Victor, he managed him. He smoothed over conflicts before they escalated, urged patience over punishment, and in the darkest moments, when Victor's rage threatened to consume everything, Michael had been that last, quiet tether to reason. But now Michael was gone, having walked away after too many broken lines and ethical compromises. His departure left more than a vacant seat at Victor's right hand, it left Victor unguarded. The angel that once sat on his shoulder was gone, and the devil no longer had to whisper. Nikki had seen this before in smaller doses, years ago during power struggles and personal betrayals. But never like this. Now Victor's fury was constant, and worse, it was aimless. He didn't just attack enemies. He went after those closest to him. Jack Abbott, Billy, Kyle, and now Claire. Nikki's hands trembled as she picked up the family photo on the side table. Claire's face smiled back at her, young, hopeful, still bruised from the sins of her parents but trying to build a new future with Kyle. A future Nikki had hoped would help heal the generational wounds of the Newman and Abbott families. But Victor had no interest in healing. He had only one priority, dominance. And in his mind, Kyle Abbott represented a threat. Another man poised to pull a Newman woman away from the family line. It was irrational, but Victor's need to control masked itself as protection. When Nikki discovered he had enlisted Audra Charles to sabotage Claire and Kyle's relationship, she had felt her stomach drop. The plan was subtle, whispered in boardroom corridors and planted in private HR evaluations, suggestions that Claire's loyalties were divided, that her rise through the ranks was too convenient, too quick. Audra, precise and emotionless, had carried out Victor's wishes with surgical efficiency. Claire hadn't even realized it was happening until the foundation beneath her began to crack. Nikki knew all too well how this kind of damage worked, quiet, invisible, devastating. She had tried to reason with Victor in their bedroom that night, her voice soft but urgent. "They're young," she said. "They deserve a chance. Claire is finally finding something real. You can't take that from her." Victor's response was chilling in its finality. "I'm protecting her from a mistake." "No," Nikki had said quietly, with tears in her voice, "you're protecting your pride." But he didn't listen. And so Nikki turned to Victoria. Her daughter had always inherited Victor's fire but channeled it into discipline, business, and at times, rebellion. They sat on Victoria's sunlit terrace the next morning, the wind rustling the trees as Nikki poured out her fears. About Victor's vendetta, about Claire's growing paranoia, about Audra's cold role in it all. Victoria listened in stunned silence, her knuckles whitening around her coffee cup. "He's trying to destroy their relationship," she asked, voice trembling between fury and disbelief. Nikki nodded slowly. "He's using Audra. And Claire doesn't even know how deep it goes." Victoria stood abruptly, the chair scraping behind her. "That's it. No more." The confrontation came that evening, at the Newman ranch, where Victor was reading through quarterly reports by the fireplace as if the world outside hadn't shifted. Victoria burst in, eyes blazing, no longer the polished CEO but the daughter of a man she could no longer recognize. "I know what you're doing," she snapped. "I know about Claire. About Kyle. About Audra." Victor looked up slowly, his face calm, composed, but his eyes sharp. "I'm doing what needs to be done." Victoria didn't flinch. "No. You're destroying what doesn't belong to you. Claire is not your pawn. Kyle is not your enemy. This obsession, this vendetta, it's tearing us apart." Victor rose to his full height, voice low. "I'm protecting this family." "You're tearing this family apart," she shouted. "You've gone after Jack, Kyle, Billy, fine, you've always hated them. But now Claire? You think I don't see it? You think I don't know what you're capable of when you think you're right?" Victor stepped closer, his tone now laced with ice. "You forget who you're speaking to." "No, I remember exactly who I'm speaking to," Victoria replied, her voice trembling with rage. I'm speaking to the man who once told me family was everything. Who said loyalty was sacred. And now you're poisoning everything you built. I will not let you destroy Claire. I will not let you drive Kyle away just because you're afraid of losing control. Victor's expression didn't change, but the silence between them was a blade. He turned his back, walked to the window, and spoke without turning around. I'm doing what must be done. Victoria took a breath, her voice soft but steely. If you destroy this for her, if you take this from Claire, I will never forgive you. Not as your daughter. Not as her mother. Victor froze, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Slowly, he turned around, and for a moment, just a flicker. Something human stirred in his eyes. Doubt, or guilt, or the memory of who he used to be. But then it vanished, buried beneath decades of war and pride. He said nothing. Victoria left without another word. In the days that followed, the damage deepened. Claire began to pull away from Kyle, not because she didn't love him, but because every conversation, every glance, now carried the weight of suspicion planted by Audra. Kyle noticed it too. The sparkle in Claire's eyes dimmed, her laughter grew guarded, and when she finally asked, "Are you only with me because of who I am?" he realized the rot had begun. Nikki watched it all unfold and felt helpless. Without Michael to buffer the storm, Victor had no leash. Without Victoria's forgiveness, the Newman household was on the verge of fracture. And without the truth, without someone tearing open the curtain of manipulation, Claire and Kyle would be the latest victims in a war they never chose. Somewhere, beneath the heavy silence of the ranch and the boardrooms of Newman Enterprises, the empire that Victor Newman had spent a lifetime building was beginning to buckle. Not from external threats. Not from Jack or Billy or even Dumas. But from within. From the fire that had once fueled greatness, and now threatened to burn everything to ash.